And hello, Evolvers. This is your friend, America's sweetheart, Jeff Norman, coming to you from Southern California. Kevin Nicolizi in Crimea, Arkady Itkin in the Bay Area, as they say. There's only one bay, right? So it must be San Francisco. And Laurie Spencer, can I reveal what state you're in besides a state of confusion? A state of despair over technical issues. Me too, Laurie. Since you were having technical issues, you don't even know about mine, or maybe you do. Laurie Spencer in Oklahoma. How you doing, Laurie?
I am good now that my stuff is working. But at least my computer turned on this morning, Jeff, so I'm off to a good start.
Well, mine didn't, so I'm using an old crappy computer, so our technical quality may not be so great, but we're going to try to compensate for that with an interesting conversation. Laurie's a veteran radio announcer and has been doing some podcasting in recent years, as the kids are wont to do. But she also is a rather fervent supporter of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. What's that? Is that a picture of him?
That would be him right there. But that was a long time ago before his hair turned gray.
Oh, okay.
That was like 15 years ago, back when I was trying to draft Bobby Kennedy to run for president in 2008. That's how long I've been pestering this guy to please run for the White House and save this country. But he wasn't ready in 2008 for a number of reasons, and time wasn't right for him. But now it is, and he's ready, and I'm ready. So we're going to do this. We're doing it. We're doing it.
That's you in the photo, I guess, is what you're saying, right? Yeah?
Yep. That was us at various places. I think that one's Oklahoma. That one's down in Texas, Houston, Texas. But I tried so hard to get him to run back then. But I realize now, you know how hindsight is 2020. I realized then that my timing was off because I didn't see Barack Obama coming. You know, I started talking to Bobby in late 2007. We were trying to get a jump on the
Bobby.
primaries.
She calls him Bobby. You know, she's a fangirl when she calls him Bobby.
It is strange to call a man who's 69 years old Bobby. It sounds kind of...
not so strange you don't do it.
Sounds like a kid, you know?
Yeah, I know. Bobby. I expect to see him like wearing shorts. Actually, I don't know what I have in my mind is the picture of not him, but John F. Kennedy Jr., like in shorts, saluting at his father's casket. Remember that famous, iconic photo?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Now, when I think of John F. Kennedy Jr., I think of the grown-up John Kennedy Jr. in shorts, playing football in Central Park without a shirt on. And all the girls would go, hubba, hubba. Woo. He was hot.
Well, Arkady suggested that we talk about RFK's announcement. What was it that thrilled you? You're not a fanboy, but you just kind of recognize there's something significant. What's getting your fire going on him?
Well, absolutely. I think RFK Jr. provides us with something that we've been missing on all ends. It provides us with the dignity that we really want so much from our president, to call someone that we could be proud of, that Biden was supposed to be, according to some people, and he's anything but. And also something less divisive, something less in your face than Trump, and also someone who presents well, someone who doesn't have the baggage, as far as we know, the skeletons, except the skeletons that we could easily address with vaccines, and I think turn him into his favor. No drama with recent settlements, no financial issues, and also not having that personality that so many people find unlikable, if not unpalatable. And it seems like a lot of Republicans would not be crying if RFK Jr. has become a president. So he's less divisive than anyone else. And it's really sad that he's being attacked by the left, because they don't want someone who is thinking outside the box and bringing something to us that we need so desperately, and the other candidates, the other options aren't giving us.
Yeah, I think you're right. He is more palatable to conservatives and also people who don't really identify with any particular party. But the Democrats have a history of expecting perfection, absolute purity, and if somebody they think
Are you
if somebody
kidding
they
me?
well, what I'm talking about in terms of, maybe that's not the right word, but they want somebody who's, totally electable, sanctioned by the powers that be in the Democratic Party. They threw it. I don't know if we call them progressives, liberals, or what, but they absolutely threw Ralph Nader under the bus. Not only didn't vote for him, but they were out for blood, like they hated his guts because he had the temerity to run against their officially sanctioned candidate. They threw Elliot Spitzer. He didn't run for president. But I'm just giving you an example of the mentality. If there's something that isn't quite right, they aren't going to stick by you, and it's very tough. Nader's probably the better example. So what do you all think about getting Democrats on board to support Bobby?
Good luck. No, actually,
That's not the voice of optimism I'm hearing.
that's the voice of realism. I mean, I'm very excited about his candidacy. A few people would be more excited than I am, but running in the Democratic Party, I know why he's doing it. I get it. The Kennedys and the Democratic Party go together like peanut butter and jelly. It's hard to imagine a Kennedy not running as a Democrat. And he wants to save the Democratic Party. I mean, somebody has to do it. And if a guy named Kennedy can't do it, then that party can't be saved. But they're going to fight him tooth and nail every step of the way. And it's going to be so difficult because they have super delegates. What Bobby envisions is doing sort of what Donald Trump did with the GOP in 2016, doing a hostile takeover, taking the party back from the neocons. That's what he did, and it was beautiful. Bobby wants to do the same thing in the Democratic Party, but it's much more difficult with superdelegates who really pick the nominee. And we know from the WikiLeaks disclosures back in 2016 how they rigged the primaries, rigged that convention so that
It's also
Bernie
just
Sanders
kind of
wouldn't have a shot.
ordinary influencers. I see these assholes on Twitter who are kind of like Democratic Party people who are always pushing for Biden, are already jumping on him, just like, as Arkady mentioned, what Arkady mentioned as an asset, they mentioned as like, oh, that's the kiss of death, or that's a terrible thing that Republicans like him. They think that means, oh, he's evil, he's terrible because Republicans like him.
Which is just silly because that's how you win the general election. You can't just win with Democrats alone. That's why we've had such close elections. That's why 2020 was so close. That's how polarized this country is. Everyone's stuck in their camps and they don't want to talk to the guy on the other side of the aisle. That's how we got in this mess in the first place. We need a candidate who can bring these two warring factions together. And Bobby Kennedy, of all the candidates currently in the race, seems to be the best guy to do that. He does have appeal to Republicans. I know a lot of Trump voters who plan to switch their voter registration so that they can at least support him in the primary. And maybe, just maybe, he'll win them over by the time we get to the general.
Yeah, well, that's what they think. The strategy is to weaken him, so that's why some of these Democrats are against him. Now, Arkady mentioned, go ahead. I'm sorry, Kevin.
Well, I was going to say, we got a question from Stephen in the chat here that says someone said he's for the war. Laura, can you clarify? My understanding is he believes in the reasons we're in the war with Ukraine, but he does not support sending all the money that's being sent. Is that correct?
The way he put it the other night in his, the other day in his speech when he announced on Wednesday, he gave a long, 2-hour speech addressing everything, including that issue. The way he put it was initially what we, the American people, were told as to why we went into Ukraine was humanitarian reasons, right? Supposedly we were there to rescue them from evil Vladimir Putin and the Russians, right? And it turns out, like every other war that we've been involved in since World War II, that we got into it predicated on lies that our government told us. So he understands that we've been lied into yet another war, that our reasons for being involved are not out of the goodness of our hearts, not for humanitarian reasons. And yet he respects the other side's point of view. This is such a polarizing issue. As he said in his speech, everyone says you're either a Nazi or you're a puppet of Putin, and there's no in between. And we will never have peace if that's the way we look at it. You have to have respect for the other guy's point of view. He definitely has respect for the Ukrainian point of view because this war has come home to his own family. We don't have a draft yet, but his 27-year-old son, Connor, he volunteered to go fight in the International Legion in Ukraine. He did a tour of duty in the Kherson offensive, I believe, and he saw real battlefield action. He was lucky to come home in one piece. He's now back in the United States. And what's interesting about that, I mean, his son totally believes in the mission and why we're there. Maybe he's young and idealistic. Maybe he's been propagandized. Maybe it's a sincerely held conviction, but that's how he feels. Now, if any of you are a father, you might have a son or daughter of fighting age. If they went to war, even if you didn't support the war, wouldn't you support your kid? Wouldn't you be proud of your kid for coming home alive?
Yeah, but that's not really a presidential thing. I mean, it's understandable, but whether or not it was an illegal invasion, as he put it, shouldn't be based on whether or not his son served. So you say you're giving it a nice positive spin. I don't think it was the most parts of what he said were good, but why don't we play a clip from it so that people know what we're talking about? This is RFK Jr. from his announcement speech talking about the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
That we are in the Ukraine for all the right reasons. We are there because we are a good people. And, Abraham Lincoln said, America is a great nation because we're a good nation. And we continue to be a good people. And we are there because of our compassion of the Ukrainian people who have been brutalized, who have been illegally invaded, and have shown extraordinary valor and courage defending their country and defending, their families and their beliefs and their liberties and their independence, things that Americans have to admire.
Oh, we have to admire. Well, if we have to.
I don't know about that. Americans can agree to disagree. I mean, again, we're going to agree to disagree. I don't believe that Putin did an illegal invasion. I think I know this trouble's been brewing since 2014, and he had to protect the people of the Donbass. I think Bobby realizes that, but he also has to walk that line very carefully because don't forget, guys, we're in a new Cold War, and you're not going to get elected dog catcher unless you say bad things about Putin and Russia. I mean, it's just the way it is. I'm sorry.
Well, being a few hundred kilometers short of the war line, having a brother-in-law in Ukraine and people on the Russian side, I agree. It's a very touchy line to walk.
Well, we aren't the candidates though, so we can say how we feel. So do you think that that's not necessarily what he believes? He's saying what he has to. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's a mix. I mean, he does have so many in his family who are cheerleading this war on the Ukrainian side. They're all good Democrats.
Yes, his family also doesn't approve of his vaccine stance. So
that's right.
I don't
they disagree on pretty much everything.
Also,
I don't know what that means exactly. Some people seem to think it's significant that his relatives disagree. I say, well, so what is the answer to that? So fucking what that they disagree with him?
What family doesn't disagree on every issue?
Let's just get to who's right and who's wrong, not whether or not everybody in the family agrees.
Also, because we're good people, reasoning can be very triggering even to me, because it stinks too much of, is that why we put BLM stickers all around? Is that why we decriminalize homelessness and open drug use? we're doing a lot of things because we're good people that are disastrous. So not a good reasoning, and it's certainly not a true reason we're in Ukraine, whether you agree with the war or not. So not a good pitch, I think, in this case.
Yeah. What about the vaccine issue? How much of a factor is that going to be in the election?
I think 2 years ago it would have been a huge issue. Probably would have been a disqualifying issue for Bobby. I mean, you saw how he was demonized for even questioning the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. And even to this day, the mainstream media calls him an anti-vaxxer. Every headline you see with his name is prefaced by anti-vaxxer Robert Kennedy. But, you know, time has passed. More science has come in on the vaccines, and we are seeing just piles and piles of evidence, both scientific and anecdotal, showing us that these vaccines can be very harmful for some people. For others, they seem to be just fine. But, you know, those health risks were not disclosed. These vaccines were not tested properly. They literally did a test on the entire human race. They just rolled them out and did a clinical trial on everybody on the fly. And fingers crossed, let's hope this thing works. And it turns out they didn't perform as advertised. They didn't stop the transmission of the virus. And Bobby was merely questioning this all along. He was one of the first on board back in the spring of 2020 to question the wisdom of lockdowns, to question the wisdom of masking everywhere, to question whether or not masks really stopped the transmission of the disease. Now we know that in most cases they don't. Not the little surgical masks anyway, unless you're wearing a good quality respirator or N95, doesn't stop that virus. Neither does the vaccine. So I think he's in a much better position now. That's just my opinion.
Well, if you're advising him, do you say, Bobby?
I'm not advising him.
I know. If you were, would you say, hey, play up an I told you so attitude and make that a big deal? Or would you say, emphasize some other issues to show that you're not just an anti-vaxxer?
I would just tell him to stick to the science. That's how you win the debate. Bring your
no, but I'm asking how to balance it with other issues. Akadi is having a convulsion there. What are you trying to say?
Go ahead.
What are the thoughts going through your head?
I'm ready to advise to Bobby to do something extremely unifying. Guys, my voters, don't freak out. I'm not going to cancel all the vaccines. I'm not going to direct any agency to just cancel all the child vaccines, even though I don't like them. All I might do is direct them to review our current policy, to look at from different angles and modify it if they deem so to be appropriate. That's it. No reason to freak out.
All right, but what about other issues? I mean, this is a pretty new candidacy, and the electorate isn't all that familiar with him yet, including myself. I don't know about you guys. I think he just added some things on his website. I haven't had a chance to look too deeply, but as of a few days prior, there was nothing at all there. So are there one or two other issues that he is emphasizing?
Well, one of the things that I really liked to hear in his speech the other night was when he said we have to protect whistleblowers, which is something that current and former administrations have not done. They prosecute whistleblowers. You know, he had Julian Assange's father, John Shipton, on his podcast. Bobby hosts a podcast called The Defender. He recently had Julian's father on to talk about his case. And at the end, he said those words that are music to my ears and to every supporter of Julian Assange is that Julian Assange deserves a pardon. And I know that if we can get him elected, if we can have another President Kennedy, probably one of the first things he does, hopefully on day one, is that he will pardon Julian Assange and free that man. So that's one of the big issues that's motivating me to help his campaign, because I want to help Julian Assange.
Yeah, well, that impresses me. I don't know about the electorate or what percentage of the electorate, but I
Does
like
anybody
that.
out there care about Julian? I know a lot of people do, but it's not going to be a huge issue in the campaign.
Should
it will
be.
for a lot of us. It should be.
Yeah.
It's a free press issue, you know,
Right.
the freedom of speech. So
But
Ziba was
not enough people care about that, though. You know, half of the country is very punitive. You know, they're now wanting to punish people who don't say the right thing in all these ways, and the Democrats are applauding it.
That's
I
right.
saw that they just arrested 4 U.S. citizens for writing anti-U.S. storyline articles.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Uhuru movement guys.
And
Matter of
what's the
fact,
terrible woman's name who wants to who's threatening Matt Taibbi with prosecution?
Stacy Plaskett.
Yes, what a horrible
Representative
person.
Plaskett.
Yeah, because he made a minor mistake that he admitted to when he was testifying. She's saying that he's guilty of perjury and he's facing years in imprisonment. These
give me a
are terrible
break.
people.
Isn't that interesting how they're never interested in enforcing the perjury laws against people like James Clapper or Jim Comey or Hillary Clinton when they lie to Congress, right? They're only
wasn't even
interested in
lie, though.
enforcing it against political enemies that they pursue.
You're absolutely right, but this wasn't even a lie. He didn't lie. He made a
He didn't
mistake.
lie. It was just a goof.
Yeah.
Anybody could have
But this
made
is the
that
mindset you have. If you look at all the people on Twitter who are on this team, so to speak, they're applauding this. Oh God, I can't. This is why I am a near misanthrope, and we need a word that means almost a misanthrope. Because I definitely don't hate everybody, but the percentage of people, I don't know.
I hear you. Sometimes.
So
I do.
Ziba was asking about his stance on the environment.
Right.
Oh, that's what he's known for. He's an environmental
Any
lawyer.
particular question or about that?
No, she just
Just kinda
said,
general?
what is his stance on it? Is he a corporate lawyer?
Well,
see if I can find it here.
Isn't it?
I think there's a big difference between an environmentalist and a climate change wacko. What we see happening, say, with these folks who like to throw oil on classic paintings and deface buildings and do more damage to the environment. To me, that's my personal opinion. I'm not speaking for Bobby, but to me, that's pretty crazy. That's kind of out there. I'm not really sure that that's helping their cause. Bobby, on the other hand, he's kind of what I'd call an old school environmentalist. He's all his life. He's spent his entire life out in nature, in the outdoors. He's a master falconer, trains exotic birds of prey, hunter, gatherer. He wants to protect the rivers, the lakes, the fish.
And he's done so. I mean,
land.
that's what he's done throughout his career. He's not a
Correct.
corporate
He's had a 40-year career of suing polluters. That's what he does. That's what River Keeper's all about. That's what Water Keeper's all about. Those are the nonprofit organizations that he founded or has worked with for so many years. I've lost count, decades. But that's literally what he does. He sued Monsanto successfully. He's sued so many big companies over the years to get them to stop polluting. That's,
of course,
clean
Ralph
water is
Nader
important to us all.
Ralph Nader has a similar pedigree, and but he's
he
an
kind of
evil
comes
person
from that
now.
old school Ralph Nader kind of environmentalist, which I think is vastly different from what we see today with the climate alarmism. I've never seen Bobby talk like that. I do want to address one thing that's been circulating a lot on social media since you talk about the smears and the misrepresentations of what he actually said. There are a lot of people out there, and I've seen this, they've come to me and asked, hey, what about this? For years, he's been saying that we should be putting corporate polluters in prison. If they break the law, if they're harming people in vast numbers, they should be held accountable. They usually aren't. But he's actually said that corporate polluters should be in prison. But they took a clip of old speech, took it out of context. Now they're circulating it in a 15-second clip where it sounds like he wants to lock up ordinary, everyday, individual Americans who don't believe in climate change. They're just expressing an opinion.
Just a complete lie.
It's a lie. They're trying to say, oh, he wants to lock you up because you don't believe in climate change. That's completely false. Bobby is a a strong advocate of the First Amendment. He's not the guy who's going to lock you up if you disagree with him on the environment. Actually, that would be Joe Biden. Joe Biden's the guy who's locking up individual Americans for their opinions. Go look at the Restrict Act. You could be looking at 20 years in prison if you hold the wrong opinion, if that law becomes law. And look what he's doing to the Uhuru movement right now. There's another example of Joe Biden locking people up, American citizens who apparently have the wrong opinion.
Yeah, saw the effort to raise funds online yesterday. Got quite a bit to represent the Uhuru people.
Yeah,
so let's talk a bit about the Kennedy mystique, the Kennedy magic. It's probably not what it used to be because, the younger people now aren't as attached to it, but it's still, I think, a significant factor. And Bobby, by the way, what do I have to do to get you to call me Jeffy? Would you call me Jeffy in the same way you call him Bobby?
I like it, Jeffy.
That might put me
I'll
into a
call
better
you Jeffy
mood.
from now on.
I'm in a foul mood today. That might help. Anyway, so Bobby referred to how he was with his father's body right after he was killed. Now, those of us of a certain age, I mean, I was about 8 years old at the time, and I watched it on TV. And many of us who even are younger have seen footage of it. Man, if you don't cry or get all choked up in some fashion when you see that, I don't know if you're human. Kevin is so choked up he left us, but now he's back. He obviously had to get a Kleenex. But he talked about that famous train ride where they brought his casket from Washington to New York. So let me show you some footage of RFK Jr. talking about it, and also some footage of the train ride.
I was with my dad when he died in Los Angeles, and we brought him back to New York on Vice President Humphrey's plane on US-2, and we waked him at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And then we brought him from Penn Station in New York to Union Station in Washington, D.C. Normally that's a 2.5-hour train ride. And it took us 7.5 hours because there were 2 million people on the tracks. And that, I will never forget, as a 14-year-old boy, what I saw from the windows of that train that day. In all of the urban train stations in Trenton and Newark and Philadelphia and Baltimore, they were crowded with black and white men singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic. In the countryside, there were white people in military uniforms. There were blacks. There were rabbis and priests. I remember in Delaware there were 7 nuns standing in the back of a yellow pickup truck, just waving handkerchiefs at us as we passed. We saw. I remember passing a Little League game, where all of the kids on both sides, both teams, the coaches, and all the spectators in the stand were standing with their hands at their hearts in salute. We saw Boy Scout troops saluting, military officers and personnel, hippies in tie-dye t-shirts. It was people holding up babies, mothers holding up babies. Many of them had American flags. Many of them had signs that said, "Goodbye, Bobby," or "Pray for us, Bobby."
Wow, that is always so moving. Always. No matter how many times I've seen that.
I wasn't even alive yet, Jeff, but it gets me in the feels. So I can't imagine how it must feel for, people who do remember it firsthand like you do. And especially being a child at that time, that's the kind of thing you never forget.
How old was he then? Do we
He was
know?
14.
Oh, 14. Now, in the middle of that, there's a picture of what looks like a 14-year-old kid in the train window. Was that him? Do we know?
Hard to tell because all the Kennedy kids were on that train.
Yeah.
But, he was not in Los Angeles at the time of his father's death. He was in school back east. And some of the Kennedy kids were out there. Bobby wasn't. He had gone to bed the night before after he heard that Dad won the primary. So then he went off to bed. It was pretty late and was awakened with the bad news. And President Lyndon Johnson sent Air Force Two, like you just told the story, to pick up all the Kennedy kids on the East Coast and fly them out to California so that they could at least say goodbye to their dad. I think by then they knew it was too late.
Yeah, I don't have it lined up, unfortunately, but the footage of him driving through the streets of Los Angeles just before he was assassinated is also remarkable. If you think in terms of today of all the security precautions that they go through, it was really a wild, people should look it up on YouTube. It was a really wild scene, unbelievable emotion. Black people in particular, it was like Beatlemania, except
It was.
Bobby. Except Bob, yeah,
and isn't it astonishing, Jeff?
They're just all over his car, all over.
Right.
Totally dangerous situation. Yeah.
When you consider his brother had just been killed in an open car in Dallas 5 years earlier, a lot of people would gasp when they see those images of RFK with the throngs of people just swarming his car, and he's only got he's no Secret Service for presidential candidates back then. He was protected by a couple of guys who were hanging on to him so that the crowds wouldn't literally drag him out of the car because they loved him so much. I mean, they were wanting to touch him. They would pull out chunks of his hair, just trying to say, "I love you, Bobby." It was crazy like that.
Why do you think that there was so much passion for him?
They wanted him to finish what President Kennedy started. I believe that was I wasn't alive. I don't know, but from
also,
a historian,
I think
that's what I see.
I think they saw him as somebody who genuinely wanted to help Black people and did. Like when he was the Attorney General and Governor Wallace wouldn't comply with the law to let Black people go to school, and he sent the National Guard down. That image is pretty powerful too, and I think people appreciate also how he stuck up for Cesar Chavez and the farm workers. Right. So you got the Latinos and the Blacks, which together make a big chunk of the country. And, and then all the whites who liked him for whatever reason too.
And, like Bobby explained, and this is all a true story in his speech the other day, he was talking about how his father was really sort of running maybe an unwinnable race. In this day and age, we like to romanticize it and say, oh, Bobby was on track. He was going to be the nominee. He was going to be the next president in 1968. But that's not really true. When you go back and you look at that race, Hubert Humphrey was favored. After Lyndon Johnson dropped out of the race, the vice president was obviously the favor for the nominee. That's who the DNC was likely to nominate. Bobby had an uphill battle winning that nomination and a steep uphill battle in November against Nixon, who, John F. Kennedy barely squeaked by against Nixon in the 1960 election. It's one of the closest elections of all time. So it was definitely not a given that RFK was going to win. In fact, all of the big money, all the smart money was on Humphrey. Bobby was, he was the guy representing the Blacks, the Hispanics, the working class, the poor, the elderly. Those were his people. And as he said in his speech, I know I probably can't win with such a small segment of the population supporting me. I don't have the rich folks writing me big checks to my campaign, but these people need representation. The rich folks can write a check to make sure that they have lobbyists and people representing their interests in Washington. But it's my job to represent the people who can't afford that. That's the vast majority out there. That was his strategy to win. I'm pretty sure that his son's going to take that same strategy, and he definitely set the tone for that in his speech on Wednesday.
So I just have to ask this, being the Putin puppet that I am, especially since I'm seeing the question in chat as well. Is he actually going to be able to govern, or is he going to be like Putin says? The guys in the dark suits with the dark ties come in, they tell him what he's going to do, and he has to do it.
Or else.
Or else.
Or else, yeah.
Or else.
I don't
know. If your last name was Kennedy, what would you do? If your dad was murdered by the CIA, if your uncle was killed by the CIA, how would you govern if you were lucky enough to get that job? I don't know about you, but if I were Bobby, I'd have some scores I'd want to settle. first and foremost. And one of the first things he's going to do is release those JFK files that the CIA has been holding secret from us for 60 years. 60th anniversary of President Kennedy's assassination is coming up this November. What could possibly be in those files that there'd be any legitimate reason for national security to keep that classified? We were supposed to have those files 5 years ago under the JFK Records Act. They should have all been released in 2017. But President Trump had the opportunity. He kicked the can down the road twice under pressure from the FBI and the CIA, who told him, we have national security secrets to keep. And he caved. Same with Biden. He's also had 2 opportunities to release the files. Right now, JFK historians are suing the Biden administration to pry those files out of the Biden administration and the CIA. So when you ask me how we'd govern on matters of war, I think he made it very clear in his speech on Wednesday that he's a man of peace, that he wants to be fair to both sides in this war and come to an amicable agreement and end this war as soon as possible.
The question you asked and then answered yourself could have been answered a different way, which was, given what happened to his brothers, what would you do? One answer would be, well, he might be afraid because of what happened to his brothers. I mean, I'm not saying he is. I'm just saying it seems like that's a conceivable thing.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think? Are there signs that he's fearless, or are there no such signs?
I can't speak for him. I can only give you my personal opinion. But I think just by running, just by declaring his candidacy, by standing up there on Wednesday and saying the things that he said, incredibly dangerous, incredibly courageous, putting his life on the line, no doubt about it. And a lot of people are already predicting that, the CIA is going to kill him too. He's been asked about it and he said, I'm not worried about my safety. So he's at that place in his life where his children are grown. He's got nothing to lose. And he's doing this for the people, for the country. Why? Because nobody else will, Jeff. No other leader has really emerged who's willing to take those kinds of risks, to put himself on the line like that. I mean, President Trump had 4 years and he failed us, in my opinion, on a lot of things. I supported Trump in 2016 and he let me down. Well,
Trump is another one.
Time and time again to the deep state. When they put pressure on him, he gave them whatever they wanted. Bobby's not going to do that. I don't think he will.
Well, Donnie, as long as you're calling him Bobby, Donnie is another one who you could say is vulnerable to assassination because of who he pisses off and how much.
Yep.
But I think one thing to consider compared to what back in the day when JFK and RFK got assassinated is nowadays there's cameras everywhere. And it's not just the grassy knoll footage. So it might be that they're all a bit safer just because it would be harder to pull off without it being disclosed by the zillions of cameras everywhere. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Great point. I'm a JFK historian. I study the assassination. I've seen the Zapruder film and every other angle where everybody had a camera in Dallas. And there just weren't that many. There were probably 10 sources maximum of footage of the Kennedy assassination or the moments around it. But yeah, could you imagine if that happened out in a public place today, like it did in 1963, where everyone's got their iPhone, their cell phone up in the air taking footage? It'd be all over YouTube. We'd have so much evidence. You'd think it would be difficult for the shooters to escape Dealey Plaza without being captured on film if we had a chance to do that all over again.
Yeah, plus the way everybody would be pontificating about it on social media and so forth.
That's
right. It would be a very risky operation to pull off if anybody wanted to do that.
Which is why, Jeff, I think they're going after the character assassination instead. That's why they're calling him an anti-vaxxer, a menace, a loon, a crazy person. I mean, he's just, they're going to assassinate his character. They're going to bring up everything he's ever done wrong in his life. He back in the 70s, in the 60s, he was sex, drugs, and rock and roll, baby. He was a heroin addict for several years. He's been clean now for more than 40 years, but He lived, and like a lot of the Kennedy men, he liked women. So he's got a lot of women in his past. As he said in his speech on Wednesday, he said, if all the skeletons in my closet could vote, I'd be king of the world.
That's a good line.
Isn't that great?
So you've been hosting Twitter Spaces, these audio-only discussions on Twitter. Can you tell us a little bit about why you're doing that and how it works? And do you get it? I know that optimistically, of course, you want there to be a big movement for Bobby, but realistically, what's it look like at this point? What's the potential?
We're starting small. I mean, we host Matthew Towers, my co-host, every Monday night, 6:30 Pacific, 8:30 Central, 9:30 Eastern. We host a Twitter space, just a meeting for supporters of Bobby and the RFK campaign. We just like to get together and talk about the latest news, how he's looking in polls. We talk about the issues. We talk about campaign strategy, volunteer opportunities, things that you can do to get involved and give people the latest news on the campaign. It's usually an hour. Sometimes we go longer. We open the floor. If anybody has questions about his campaign that you'd like to ask or statements you'd like to make, anything that concerns you, you're more than welcome. Everybody's welcome. It's public Twitter space, and it's just a place for us to gather. So we do that every Monday night. And if you're on Twitter, if you're not, I usually upload the episode, the Twitter space, on my YouTube channel afterwards. So if you miss it or you're not on Twitter, you can always come listen to it over there. But I think that's important. We need to build that sense of community. The people are going to be the ones who decide if he's the next president of the United States. And we just figured, hey, why not get started now? Let's do it. I mean, why wait? So
look how I'm getting credit for you being a bright lady. I like that.
And guys, I like what Rufus says. Rufus Ray, he says, look, I disagree with a lot of what he says, but I am willing to listen. It's too early to make up your mind. You don't have to make up your mind about anything right now. The idea now is to listen, to gather as much information, and not to expect to 100% agree with anyone or disagree with anyone. Right?
Exactly. I see so many people out there online who want Bobby to pass every purity test, right? They want him to be perfect. It's like they're holding him to a higher standard than they held Joe Biden or Donald Trump, which doesn't quite seem fair. But they are, and they want him to be everything that they want him to be. And if he's not, then they're like, well, then I'm not going to support him. And that's not how politics works, guys. I mean, you're very lucky if you find a candidate that you agree with on 80% of the issues. 90, that would be great if you could agree with your candidate 90% of the time, or your party. But we all have to evaluate for ourselves on a case-by-case basis which issues are the ones that are no compromise for you. Maybe for some it's the war, maybe for others it's medical freedom, for others it's transparency in government or Medicare for all. I mean, whatever your key issues are that you're not going to compromise on, that might affect your vote, right? But otherwise, politics is the art of compromise. We all have to be willing to accept a candidate who's not going to make us 100% happy 100% of the time. That's just not realistic.
And deep state or not, a president has to please more than one side more often than not. So we have to keep that into account.
Exactly.
Well, I think folks can see that Lori's Twitter handle is @LoriSpencer. Just remember that Lori is spelled Lori. And for those who don't use Twitter for one reason or another, such as they're very upset about being charged for check marks, there's such an uproar over that. How can they find you on YouTube, Lori?
It's just Lori Spencer on YouTube. And also I am a co-host over at Maverick News, the Maverick News channel, which is on YouTube and Rumble, at least for the time being. I think we're on pretty thin ice with YouTube. They just killed 4 of our backup channels last week, and we just got permanently demonetized. for having an unpopular opinion, I guess, with Pfizer, one of YouTube's biggest advertisers. So anyway, I don't know how much longer we're going to be on YouTube. The point is, please subscribe on Rumble because pretty soon we might not be on YouTube at all.
Hey,
Lori,
YouTube-
I just
Oh, sorry, Arkady.
no. I just have to say, how is it not obvious to all these companies that there are all these other companies like Rumble that are making a killing, that are monetizing the whole anti-censorship movement? How is it not obvious to them right now, after Twitter files, after CIA leak, that what they're doing is not good for their business, is not good for the people? That's just incredible.
It is, isn't it? And
Well, actually, no, I don't agree with that. I certainly I am for free speech, but I don't agree the evidence is there that it's bad for their business. The money is with YouTube and not with Rumble. They keep getting more and more popular, and our channel is getting more and more popular, but we don't make any money on Rumble.
Okay. Not yet, maybe. Not yet.
That's
well,
true.
hopefully. But I mean,
that's just it. I think you're right, Jeff, that YouTube doesn't care because they are making so much money. They don't have to care. If you don't like their policies, they're like,
there's always going to be competition, right? They're not going to go fold because there's competition. They're with the money. I'm not saying this is a good thing. It's a terrible thing.
Yeah. Well, there's something I want to point out. Since I started volunteering for the Kennedy campaign, I've been making a lot of videos about the campaign and uploading them to my channel. And every single video that I produce about RFK Jr. is a fight. I got a fight on my hands with YouTube every single time, saying, this material may not be suitable for our advertisers. Literally. And we all know who those advertisers are, don't we? It's Pfizer. Right. It's Big
Lori,
Pharma.
I do have to say that his website, the campaign site, is very sparse in detail, very, very vague on his campaign. I don't know if it's strategic or on purpose or not, but it could use some more specifics and beef.
I agree with you. I was just saying that to a friend last night. I was like, well, we finally got a website up. I'm sure that was a lot of scramble just to get that going. But we need a lot more detail. There's some wonderfully written pages that give you a general idea of where he stands on key issues. But so far, we're not seeing specific policy in detail. And it is early in the race. And certainly, he's probably working on those things himself right now, fleshing out exactly what he wants to do. We're all eager to see those details. I am too. And I'm sure they're coming. But
I think so. I would not conclude it's because he's a lightweight. I would conclude it's because he just didn't get to it yet. That speech he gave, he did not sound like a lightweight. He sounded like a substantive person.
Absolutely. It's one of the things I really liked about Bobby and why I wanted him to run all those years ago was I was just so impressed with his outlook, with his education. I love his books. He's written several really fine books. We all know The Real Anthony Fauci because it was a runaway bestseller and it's his most recent smash hit book. But before that, he's written, I think, 7 or 8 other books. One of them, which I would recommend, my favorite, is a book called American Values, Lessons I Learned from My Family. If you're curious about RFK Jr., if you don't know much about him and you want to find out where he comes from, what his life has been like, I would definitely recommend that book because it's from his own experience, his own words. And what's surprising about that book is when he, did the thing that Kennedys never do. No Kennedy in the Kennedy family ever, ever, ever said that the Warren Commission was wrong. Bobby did. No one in the Kennedy family, including Senator Ted Kennedy, ever questioned whether Sirhan Sirhan was guilty of the murder of Robert Kennedy. Bobby did that too. Bobby has visited Sirhan in prison. He has written letters to the parole board advocating for Sirhan's release. He doesn't think that Sirhan shot his father. He doesn't think that Sirhan fired those fatal shots. He believes that his father's true killer was a security guard, a rent-a-cop, guy by the name of Thane Eugene Caesar, who was standing right beside Bobby Kennedy, had a gun. And when shots rang out, Sirhan was there. Sirhan fired gun, but he's firing all over the kitchen. Bullets are ricocheting everywhere. 5 other people got hit. And it was a perfect distraction. You might say a distractionary shooter, perhaps, is what Sirhan was. But the kill shot that was delivered to Senator Kennedy's ear, and Thomas Noguchi, who did the autopsy, said that from the powder burns and the evidence that shot was fired from a distance of, 1 or 2 inches away. Well, Sirhan was standing 3 feet away in front of Kennedy, but the shot came from here. It just doesn't add up. But what does add up is that security guard who was standing right next to Kennedy, who very easily could have delivered that shot. Unfortunately, there will never be justice in the case of RFK or JFK.
But it is the sort of argument that would get a lot more oxygen if it were being made by the President of the United States.
Imagine. Can you imagine? That's why people say they'll never let this man become president.
Yeah.
Because
He's
what
a
if he
threat.
talks about this stuff, What if he
He's a
exposes
threat.
the CIA? What happens then? What if he...
I want to make 2 quick points in favor of RFK Jr. First, whether he has courage or not to do certain things. The fact that he spoke so strongly and so early on against lockdowns gives me hope that he has, even before it became popular. And secondly, both sides seems to be brainwashed about climate and environment. The left is willing to turn the world upside down in the name of it. The right is like, oh my God, climate, I don't want to talk to you as soon as I hear that word. A distinction, like one of the comments said, needs to be made between climate and environment. We don't want to do some radical things too soon, but we all want sustainable future and clean air and water and nice parks, right? So we don't have to dismiss climate and environment just because climate psychos are pushing too much of it down our throat. So
Well said. I couldn't agree more with that.
Excellent. On that note, we do have another topic. And Lori, I want to invite you to hang with us if you have time. We were going to talk about how adults are at least arguably sexualizing children. There's one particular incident involving teachers and students licking cream off of plexiglass simultaneously. Oh, yeah.
Dude, I unfortunately have to go, and this topic kind of turns my stomach. So.
All right. All right. If you're going to leave it all,
just makes me go, ugh.
If you're going to leave it just to the men, we could use a woman in the mix. But all right, leave it to us. We'll do it. We'll do our
Unfortunately, I have
best.
to be somewhere by 1:30. I'm on Central Time, and I got to go. But I
right.
really enjoyed joining you guys today. Thanks for inviting me, Jeff. It was wonderful to
Lori.
meet you.
thank you so
guys.
much, Lori.
I hope
Thanks
to
for
see you
coming,
again
Lori.
soon. Thanks, everybody.
All right,
we will
take
see
care,
you
Lori.
later. See you on Maverick News today at 5. Thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot, Lori. I wonder if Lori would have jumped off so quickly if I didn't mention that other topic.
You ran me off, buddy.
Was not my intent at all. But if I ever want to get rid of a guest, now I know how to do it.
There you go. Works every time. Bye, guys. Peace.
All right. Take care.
Bye.